in the class. This is Inspired Poet by Amanda Gorman and researching the contemporary issues students created and recited to classmates. Dance is an art that imprints on the soul. It is with you in every moment. It expresses itself in everything that you do. Students learn about the cultural arts and African dancing and African drumming. Here's a sixth grade student presenting on disability rights. Native American history is important because it has established our sense of identity and belonging. We understand who we are and how we came to be because of the stories transmitted by our elders. And the gentleman in the back was a speaker that came and spoke with us and talked about different stories, Native American stories. Here, through fairy tales, the students learn about character traits. So we talk about different characters and storytelling through fairy tale. Music storytelling merges music with telling the story of people and communities. Fourth and fifth graders love reading theater. This is where students read the lines featured within the literature. This platform allows the students to express themselves through group skits. These actors are rehearsing their skits and excited about presenting them in front of their audience. Works of art often tell stories. Artists can present narratives in many ways by using a series of images representing moments and stories, or by selecting a central moment to stand for the whole story. Narrative works often illustrates contemporary, well-known, historical, religious, and legendary or myth stories. This year, I partnered with a friend, a colleague, Ms. Zena Perez, to support the students as they create original pieces. You will see some of the artwork in the back there, and I would like to have Ms. Zena Perez come up.
Hi, good afternoon. Good evening. So just a little bit about me. You guys know me as Zena Perez, but actually out in the art world, my name is Zena Smith. I am a alumni of Parkway and Glen Hills, actually, and I am a district parent as well. I have two girls here in 4th and in 8th grade. So my husband and I opened up an art gallery 3 years ago. So we opened up an art gallery. It's called R&Z Urban Art Gallery. My husband's name is Rob, and Zena is our name. We have a mission statement to teach the vital roles that art plays in engaging communities and building confidence through creativity, demonstrate the healing powers of art. So that's us. We're both different artists. I call myself an abstract mixed media visual artist. So here's just some examples of my work and that are also up in our gallery. Rob he calls himself a celebrity artist. He does portraits, mixed media. He's a pop artist, and then his mediums are styrofoam and spray paint. A little bit of just about our journey. You guys can read later on, just about us launching the gallery. It was really cool when Mr. Torrance reached out to me just regarding about protest art and protest movements and stuff like that, because we are right on National Avenue. So in 2020, when the Black Lives Matter protests and riots were going on, it was really cool to just kind of see them come right in front of our space, and our kids got to witness that too. So And then a big major milestone was definitely meeting Giannis and doing some artwork there for him. Tragically, at the end of 2020, I did lose Rob. So our mission statement really became what I'm doing now. It's just the simple fact that art can help you with mental health awareness. You know, it can, for Rob, he had a little bit of a different story. So I did lose him to gun violence, but it was the fact that, you know, art really took him out of the streets and was able to give him a purpose in life. So that's just a little bit about us. And then with his legacy, since he was more of a portrait artist, I never attempted one. But then after I lost him, I started. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. So it's just a comparison of this is his piece and this is my piece, because a friend of ours lost their piece in a fire and they wanted a recreation. So that's just a comparison of our two art styles, just the fact that we're different artists. So when I came to the class, we talked a little bit about the process of, just the processes that I go through and the storytelling piece that art really can do. I do a lot of mixed media and collage work. So this here is a piece of a gentleman. He's actually an activist outside of, he lives in Racine. So the entire piece does incorporate news articles about his story that's in his background. And then what we talked about with the kids is just giving your art a focal point. So what I like to do is the collage work in the background, but then his portrait really, you know, holds it on his story and what you're telling. So like boxing, like all these things. So it's available. So when it came to CYH class, we had a process. It was pretty much your supplies. We put on music, kids got to just, their canvases, they got to do whatever they wanted to do. We did talk about, you know, pre-planning. It wasn't just automatic paint to canvas. You really had to think about what you had studied that trimester. They got to work together in groups. It was really just the supplies. So they came up with their own things. He was tracing there. They also got to do things that are contemporary to now, you know, and not just also what they learned. So here's just some more process art. That they are on chairs and tables. And then here's some of the outcomes. Pictures and here's some of these outcomes, but I do invite you to see what the students did for yourself. So we have a lovely gallery walk back there for you guys to be able to check out their artwork and their hard work. So where is it? Right here in the back of the library.
All the portraits are on all the bookcases over here. Are we okay taking a moment to do a gallery?
Some are storytelling, fairy tales, civil rights movement. So at the end of the trimester, the kids got an opportunity to display their artwork on campus.
So for the 4th and 5th graders, we used old books, and they were either to like recreate their own story using characters in a book or just paint their own story. You know, you can even take the book pieces and use it as a background to do that. And then the older grade levels, they did the civil rights and women's movement. Some of the kids already did some pieces on Ukraine and just stopping the war. So it was really just about focusing on what you learned and being able to give yourself a visual aid of that. So it was fun. They had a good time.
You can hear their voices in their art.
For sure. Yep. Yeah. Yep. So it was a very proud moment to be able to see all of, you know, Mr. Torrance's artwork, which is awesome. You know, we get to ask you questions and we're coming in like, hey, how do you do this? And we really talked about like building up on things. Like I can put a piece here, but if you take that same character and you outline it and give it some words, it's going to give your piece more a voice and more of a story. So they worked hard.
Thank you very much.
Check it out.
It's like, are we going?
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
Danielle and Molly.
Theater stuff, lots of skits. How you doing?
That's an incredible idea. That's amazing.
Oh, you got it done.
Should I? Well, you have to get, should I? Who else? Who else? Are you doing this?
I wonder if you could take like 3 or 4 protest pieces and make a triptych for. Do you want me to give you a flyer that you could give to kids, or do you want to just?
So you guys are
I think these would all sell out.
yeah, so we got, yeah, that's cool. That was
Oh, we recorded. I would love.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, wait, I better put my name in.
Really good one. Yeah.
I didn't think of it that way, but yeah.
So, and other things.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, I really appreciate that. And I want to thank everyone for taking part in that and walking on the library. So thank you very much. And we're going to move on to item, I believe it's 3A, strategic planning update and report, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think I skipped anything there.
So basically, this was just a chance to pause in the process. We know that we had a lot of interviews with different staff, with the board, with the teachers, with families. And so we wanted to just take a pause and share with you the things that were found through those interviews, and then talk about what the next steps would be in our work as we continue working on creating a strategic plan. So this is Holly. I was like, I don't know, I maybe should have had a bio for you,
That's
but
right, I've met everyone.
Good, good. So thanks for coming in person.
Before I start though, I just have to tell you, I do this in a lot of places and it was a privilege to be part of your team. Like, it seldom do I get the response rate from people and just the welcoming nature, the willingness to be transparent in what they shared. So I'm just, you should be really proud of this community, which I know you are, but it bears saying before I dive right into what everybody said. So compliments to all of you on just the welcoming nature of the district and the community. But this is a Board of Education process. This is yours. And so you are giving strategic direction to the superintendent and the principals, and then their job is to do the actual strategic doing. And so what I have for you today is just the voice of what your community said collectively. And so I don't know if you're going to click along, Allison, but I'll just talk. So you guys have the presentation though, right? So you can follow along. Okay. So
Can we put it up there too?
So just a reminder of the purpose of this is really to listen to people and to listen to everyone in the community that we can get our done and try and figure out what are those areas of strength and what are those areas in need of improvement. And as I said to everybody, as I met with them, this is about the collective voice of your community, not necessarily any one person's opinion. So a lot of people had a thing to say that others didn't. And then there were these themes that started to emerge, and you have that in your packet. So I'm sure you glanced through it, but I'll give a little more exposition to that as I go through. The process is worth mentioning though, because we had focus groups and individual meetings, and try as we might to have that in person, the timing didn't work out because of COVID. So they were all between 15 and 30 minutes. We did them so you knew what they were. But for the people who might be listening, they were conducted January 25th and 28th, and then again on the 31st. And like I said, when I started, gosh, the smattering of people from every different aspect of your district was very well represented. And so we had people from nearly every group of stakeholder I can think of. I don't know that there were many that were missed. And so that's just kudos to you that many people wanted to participate. I'll pause lots in here to give you an opportunity to push on, ask questions, ask for more information. So at any time you want to stop me, please feel free. The base questions were ones that I tried to make sure everyone had a common experience. And then depending on time, after the first few, some themes definitely started to come forward of things people wanted to talk about. So the first questions that everyone got were, if you were trying to convince somebody to move here, what would you tell them that would get them to move into this district and this community? And then what are some areas the district needs to improve? And if you could wave that magic wand, what is one thing you would change about Glendale-River Hills? And then what else do you want us to know? We kept them really open-ended to start. I'm on the next slide.
Maybe.
Oh, you,
Is it
okay,
this one?
great, super. Oh, one more.
Okay.
Then we're all caught up. Okay, so then these areas that came up though, people started talking frequently about academics and behaviors and communication and equity. So when I had time, I pressed further into those, especially if people didn't bring them up as topics. And so I just asked about strengths and challenges that they had in those areas. The other thing that's important to know, because you were the board and you were the ones who commissioned this process, is that people were appreciative. They were glad that people were listening. I was thanked often that you engaged in this process. But they also said with turnover and the way things that are happening just in education in general, not necessarily even here, just having something written gave them confidence that it would then continue, even if people in leadership positions change. So important to note those two things. I think that's a credit to all of you for doing the process. The overall strengths. These were things that came up so frequently, and again, very common that all of these came up, which is unusual. Usually you get a bunch of different strengths. You guys were solid on these things from almost every person I talked to. Diversity. They love the diversity of the community, the diversity of the district, the diversity of the staff, and not just diversity in one narrow category, but they liked that it was diverse in a variety of ways, whether it was religion or gender or race or socioeconomic. They felt that that was a real strength of this district. a family feel. I felt like it did feel like one big family here at Glendale-River Hills. They had teachers who care. And they said the teachers don't always have the resources or ability to do what they need to do for kids, and we'll go into more of that later, but they really want to, and they felt that was a major strength. But then also, like you saw with Nina and Dr. Torrance tonight, Allied Arts came up. People were so proud of that and felt like that opportunity for kids is unique at this level, and so that was something that they felt was so strong. So those were things that I would say overall were major strengths that people pointed out.
I hate to ask, I mean, I'm enjoying this as you presented. I guess it's the corporate part of my brain here, but I mean, I always look at, you know, weaknesses and I guess, you know, threats and whatnot. I mean, at least from the sense of weaknesses, I mean, did anyone, I mean, I was looking through here, are there weaknesses that people reported?
So all of the themes actually would be areas you would consider gaps or weaknesses.
Okay.
Areas for opportunity. So all of the strengths are really the only place I talk about the strengths, and then each of those themes we go into where some of those improvement opportunities are.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I dive into the themes? To be fair, these themes are what I came up with. I'm in research methods and to be able to code so that we can come up with themes. So these were things that came up over and over and over again, emerged from the data. And then I gave you enough context to understand sort of the big areas that came up as areas in need of improvement. So I'll go one by one. I'll pause after each one in case you have questions or want more context on things.
Thanks.
The first area of a theme was communication. So there was definitely a desire for more equitable, transparent communication at all levels. And what people meant by that is it seemed like there were haves and have-nots, that communicating with people, some people had the information and people in the same team or the same level didn't have that information. And so there was a desire for, could we make sure that there's an equitable sharing of information when we have it to give?
Can you go, where you said that, I don't know if that's parents saying that, teachers saying that, because there's a difference between parents or saying that they're not getting information or they feel like it's not equitable, or teachers saying it. So there's a big difference in that. And I was wondering if you could split that out.
I can. It was all levels. And so what parents said, and some of this is just confusion in where to go for the information tends to be where parents. So some of them would say, well, we had something, but we heard it through the grapevine or we saw it on social media, but we didn't get that. And so where you're communicating tends to be for parents unsure of where to go. And parents sometimes admittedly said, yeah, I just don't read things that come home. So some of the onus they took on themselves, but there was the parent piece. There also was the teacher piece though, where teachers felt like sometimes information was shared to one teacher, but not to another teacher on things that affected their whole team. So it's important for administrators to consider when they're sharing in terms of being fair and equitable. And even some of your board members said they felt like sometimes they had information that others didn't, and they wanted to have that equal sharing with information. So it really was at all levels, but they all had a little different flavor to them. It does relate to that last bullet point on that, Tamika, about social media, where people felt like a lot of times they went to social media, and if they saw something there, they sort of filled in the rest of the gaps because they didn't know the whole story, and they felt like if information were clearer and people knew where to go to get it, that maybe people wouldn't be so active on social media. So that was, several parents said that. The other thing that I think was causing challenges for teachers, which is that second bullet point, is that role confusion. So a lot of supports and everybody wants to help kids, but when we're not clear on who's supposed to do what, teachers said everybody's trying to do something and we maybe are wasting resources, wasting time, filling in gaps with what we don't know. So they really felt that if the roles were more clearly communicated of what the specific support people do in the building, they may be able to get rid of some of that confusion on communication. So I can go deeper into that, but I don't want to balance being efficient, but also giving you the information more. So any other questions about communication?
Did Danielle have her hand up?
Well, actually, I mean, and I did skim it. I just want to kind of follow up on what I was talking about. So sometimes what we do is, you know, we do a little grid and we we have the strengths and the weaknesses, but then we also have the opportunities, and the threats. And so when I skim through this, I mean, I can see some of the, comments that people have made. I mean, in terms of opportunities and threats, I mean, in terms of kind of like that next plan, I mean, trying to understand like where we go from here. And I don't want to interrupt flow this, but after today, I mean, or at what point do we then, start to attack what those things are? Maybe this is a question for the end of the day, just to put a pin in it, but or for the end of the presentation, just put a pin in it. But I guess I'm wondering if, and I don't see it. I mean, I see some comments. I haven't heard person here. There's some comments about additional training, for example. I mean, were there clear opportunities? Were there clear suggestions on how to fix stuff that are part of this?
There were, and I think the challenge is anytime you'll have these things that come up, and administrators need to then take that information and say, what do we need to learn more about before we jump right to a solution? And so at the end, where we had stopped this presentation is giving you the information. And then Allison had planned to take this to the administrators, or actually come back to the board first and say, what are the big pillars? What are the big focus areas that you guys want to focus on? But then what are some of those opportunities that you want to nest under those pillars? And I'll get into.
Okay. Sorry, jump ahead.
You do want to take that after the board says, this is what we want you to work on in a big sense, 100,000 foot level, and then bring it back to the administrators, so they take it to the 10,000 foot level. And then the teacher.
And that's kind of our next step after this. Okay, all right, so, thank you.
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, hi, sorry. Hi, Holly, this is Danielle. Sorry, I'm calling in, I'm calling in from the road. But I had a question before you got into the communication piece. I'm interested first in about how the data, like how you organize the data. So it was just the focus groups and the individual interviews. And so I'm wondering if you could speak more to how you organized and evaluated the data to identify the themes. Like, are you looking at a majority of people are saying this? Are there qualitative decisions? You're making some comments. Were any of the group cohorts more than others? And then I just am clarifying that you're the only person who was identifying themes based on your interviews.
So I do have a partner that I work with. She's the owner of the company, and she looks at the raw data as well. So I'm not the only person who's looking at the data, but it was a qualitative research process. And so all of the information was taken down by hand, note-taking as I interviewed people, and then that information was coded. And so what we looked for, what are those themes, those words that were repeated over time, so we could find that collective opinion. And what was presented in the report is broken down a little bit more in some of that more finite data to say, here's what teachers said, students said, parents said, community members said. So you can see the themes within the subgroups, but these are the themes that were the overall themes that was collected from all of that information. So it was
what report? Sorry, Holly, what report are you referencing? Because that's not this
phenomenological if you are research savvy on your method. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Danielle.
No, I'm sorry. You referenced a report that breaks down the comments by cohorts. That report is not what we're looking at.
Correct. This is a summary report.
Sorry, I'm trying to do both.
So what is that? That's a different document.
For the board members to go through individually. If you do want to sit down, it just is so extensive that
I'm sorry.
all night. If we were presented that it's in its entirety, so we're trying to give the board a summary, but you're absolutely welcome to that.
So you and Allison you've gone over this report with just Allison. Has anybody else gone over that report, or just you two?
So I looked at it with cabinet, so with Jenica and with Lindsay, and that's the one that I referenced you in the email that we could share during our work session.
Okay, and then in terms of identifying the themes though, Holly, that was you and your partners at Peggy Black. You guys were the ones who identified the themes and then put this presentation together. That was you and Peggy Black.
Correct.
Okay.
I guess I will say something.
Are you
End of it, I just wanted to hear, actually, I'm gonna wait until the end to make my comments,
Okay.
because some of the stuff you may address.
Mhm.
But on that theme, I do have some questions, but you may address them on the way through, so I wanted to hear the full thing before I open my mouth.
Okay, actually, Holly, sorry.
At any time that's relevant. you
Yeah,
can
but
feel
I,
free.
sometimes you might go through it and answer one of my questions.
Yeah. Okay,
And
I'll
then
wait too.
and then I won't need to answer, so I'm gonna
Sure,
let you go through.
okay.
Same.
Is it okay if we move on to the
Please.
next theme?
Yeah.
All right. So the next theme, the thing that was talked about quite often was diversity and equity. And like I said, that was one of your strengths. But there were also some clear things that people felt were those areas of opportunity for improvement. So good work has been done, but people really felt there was no clear framework by which everyone operates. And so this expert was brought in, that expert was brought in, this training was done, that training was done, but what are we doing was unclear. And so people want to do good work, they just aren't sure what it is they're supposed to exactly be doing. Related to that, everyone understands the need for equity work. Everybody believes that it's important and that we still have work to do, but teachers really were craving strategies. Like, okay, we know the why, we need the what. Like, how do we do things that actually affect kids? And so if you can help us with that, they were really crying out for some of that. The other thing is that people who were in marginalized groups, the people that I talked to, felt like, yes, equity work has been done, but it's not enough. And many people still felt very marginalized. And so I think it's important to note that, yes, we're working on it, but there were a lot of people who felt like, yes, and we've done a good job and we can move on. Your marginalized groups did not necessarily agree with that. So people who were in those groups had some objections.
Just to ask, and for some clarity, what marginalized groups were speaking up on this point?
Two that came up most often were race and religion.
Race and religion?
Yes.
Well, not like special ed or?
No, as a matter of fact, special ed people, now, that's not to say that special ed doesn't necessarily feel that there are needs. There are definitely needs, but in terms of marginalization, it felt like they belong in this community. Gender, for the most part, it didn't come up as a significant theme. I'm sure there are people who've been marginalized in those communities. But
Wait, but I don't want to, I'm sorry, but I want to hear, I don't want to answer those questions because like the question you asked, all of a sudden puts in some preconceived notions and stuff like that, which I really just want to hear, like, I don't know how to explain this. I guess like you were surprised that you didn't hear special education on it.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is maybe we're doing okay in that subject and we are working towards it and people feel like we're working towards it. But every time we bring another subject, why wasn't this talked about? That marginalizes the two things that came out the most in her research. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So yes, we still may need to do work with special education, but what people may have been thinking, I know they have a plan. I know they're working on it. So I may not need to bring that up. But in this case, and I'm not trying to point fingers, but in this case where you're like, special need wasn't talked about, that just marginalized the two things, which is race and religion, that was more important. And then we go, maybe we should put special education in there. And she's kind of going like this, but that is why I didn't ask any questions, because I want to hear what you're saying, hear what the other topics are, but as a board member, I want to hear what you have, but then I want to see the whole thing. I want to see the report. I want to see exactly every single thing that everybody said in this, but I see what the big picture it is, but I also want to see every single point that anybody made, even that one person who is the only person that ever said anything, because that person, we're a collective. So if that one person feels like something needs to be done, maybe we can work it in something else and not just exclude that. So that is where I'm coming at that, but I felt as a person, when you just said race and religion, as a person of a minority, as soon as you said special education, I felt like, okay, these other people are marginal.
Well, and I'm a person for whom religion is often, you know, a concern too. So, I mean, I didn't mean, by the way, to imply anything about, you know, surprise or validity one way or the other. But honestly, we've been doing a lot of work on special education, and just historically, you know, we've known that there's been a lot of discontent with, you know, and I guess I'm using special education very broadly. There's also the umbrella of, you know, social and emotional welfare and so forth. And people might have special needs that don't necessarily fit into one thing. And, you know, it's been a pandemic, and it's been a darn long pandemic. And, you know, so frankly, you know, if we're speaking to, you know, a group, I think that that's a good thing. We're not getting complaints. You were about to hint at different marginalized groups, because you, having done that work, have, you know, clearly a list of different marginalized groups there. And you were very specific about, you know, two groups. So honestly, I maybe it was a little bit.
Actually, she wasn't specific about two groups. You asked the question about two groups.
Her answer was very specific.
But if you hadn't asked the specific question, she would have just said marginalized groups, and then we could have dived in it. But you specifically asked those groups that now she has to come with a specific answer. And then you ask about special education, which also now marginalizes the two aspects that she.
I won't ask any more questions about our
And
strategic
that's
vision.
not the point. The point,
I get what
you know
you're
what?
saying. Sue.
Never mind.
The 30,000 foot.
Right.
I agree,
Mhm.
but if it dips to
You know what?
25,000 feet,
I forgot, we are so knowing everything, and we're the experts on every single thing, that we can't possibly understand what they're saying. Let's go ahead, I don't need to understand.
I think it's important to make it clear too that the data are what the data are. My job cannot have judgment. My job is to just give you what your people said. So I'm trying to do that to the best of my ability. But the other thing is you can dive into anything with more depth if you want to, and do a survey on the different populations and really get down to what does every single person have to say. I only had a sampling. It was roundabout 50-ish people that I was able to talk to, maybe more than that when you include the groups. And so you have to remember that we can only give you what we got. So what goes in is what comes out. I'll move on, but
Please.
certainly can come back to anything that you'd like. Academic came up that there's a very strong curriculum. Problem is teachers need time, and they need training to use it to its fullest extent. And I know they also mentioned in terms of equity here that a review of the curriculum resources to make sure that they're equitable probably would be valuable work when it comes to academics. And so I didn't put that in as a bullet point, but it's noteworthy because enough people said it that it's an important point. While test scores aren't the most important thing, and people were very careful to say kids are not a test score. We don't want to be all about test scores here, but we're concerned that there's maybe not a rigorous academic expectation for every child here. And so what we can do about that would be something to dig into. People wanted to really look at that and how can we maintain those high expectations for every child, but not make it all about test scores, though those should be the metric of how well we do. And I know you've had an extensive presentation on test scores and what you look like in pandemic. Everybody took that hit, and those are looking a lot like around the state, but it'll be telling to see how they come back after you've had a full year.
Danielle has her hand up.
Sorry, that was an accident.
No, you're good. I just want to make sure you got it.
yeah,
Or can you turn yours up so we can hear
I'm
you?
gonna turn it on one second.
All right, Andy's gonna turn his computer up so we can hear you.
Yeah, because I was on mute on here. Actually, I'm out of the meeting.
What? Slide shows up.
Yeah.
All right, I'll try it. Might echo. Though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Go for it.
Couple questions.
Yes.
Again, what was the timeline? And when was the very last one you did?
January 25th to January 31st,
So these are
compacted into a week in
in
January.
January.
Correct.
Okay. Wait, until you get to the next part.
Anybody else have any additional questions before I move into that next part? Andy, this goes to your question earlier about what's next and where are we headed. And so themes versus pillars. And so Allison asked me to just put a definition in here of what is a pillar. And so the best analogy I came up with was when you think about sports. So a pillar is a broad category that allows the work to be organized so that you can talk about it in a clear and efficient way. So pillars for sports might be game strategy, training, statistics, personnel. You can see how work nests under there. And so your job as the board is to come up with what are our pillars? What are those big things that we want to say, this is what we are about in Glendale-River Hills? And so I came up with just some creative examples. This is not a recommendation. These are strictly examples for you to think about to hopefully inspire your thinking as you try to come up with how to say, okay, what do we want to dig more into? What do we think are concerns based on what we saw? And if you have the opportunity to look at that more detailed report, then what are some areas we really want to get into more? And like you said, maybe even ask people about more so we can get every single person the chance to answer that question versus just the ones that had the opportunity to talk to me. So a couple examples. The first one being the pillars might be student learning, adult learning, support systems, and equity. You can see how of what we talked about that's different than the themes. It categorizes them a little differently, and you might nestle culture of rigor under student learning, and that would be the work there. And then under adult learning, you might say there's just a lot of PD needs. Like we got to put PD under there and how we get after that. Support systems, you need a framework for special ed. You need a framework for behavior. So those support systems, that might be how you nestle the work under there. And equity, we have to have a curriculum review and we have to have that framework. So that's one way to organize it. I'm going to give you a couple more ways just to show you it's completely up to you. This is absolutely your work and creativity and it should speak to who you are. So another one is maybe frameworks, PD, operations. That's another way you could categorize it. And so under frameworks, you might say, well, we need a framework for special ed, behavior, and equity. Very clearly, those three things came out. So that's some of the work we're going to do. PD, we need it on behaviors, we need it on curriculum. So that might be how you put it in there. And then operations, you might want to say, we need to have a process by which we measure all of this regularly. We do some goal setting, some accountability. So we want to say under operations, we're going to put school improvement and continuous improvement. That's just a way to organize the thinking. So then the last example is maybe you do continuous improvement, culture of rigor, and equitable practices. Maybe those are the things that speak to you, but this is all about what speaks to you. So I think you get the idea, and I only put them there to try and inspire you, not to say I think this is how it should be organized, because that really is your work and your next steps. So to your point, Andy, Allison is going to bring back the work after you guys have a chance to really dig into the full report with her. And then talk about what are our pillars? What is it that we want to say, okay, admin team, you go back and you say, this is the work we think needs to come under here, and here's our plan. And then they bring it back to you, and you guys either approve it or don't.
Okay, gotta understand this. I'm putting it in my terms because I don't know tech. So what you're gonna do, you have all this information, you gathered it up, you have a report. What I think my understanding of the process is, now the board is going to get the full report. Any questions that we have, like I want every single list of everything that everybody said. I don't know if they all want it, but you'll probably share it. But I want that and I want the report and I'm gonna look at that. Then what I understand is, then the board are gonna have a meeting, and it has to be open session because it's open session. And we're gonna go back and forth discussing what we think the highlights or what we need to address. That's in the board. Then once we pick, whether it be one pillar or 20 pillars, we're gonna take that and we're gonna throw it to Ms. Weiss. Ms. Weiss is going to figure out strategically what program she has in mind, the day-to-day operations, how does that work? She's going to bring it back to us to see if we either have some suggestions or we don't like it or some changes. Then if we approve it, it goes back to Ms. Weiss to give to I guess, principals or the teachers to figure out their strategy on how to do these pillars under what she has put in, and then how to implement this.
For not being clear, you were crystal clear.
Okay.
I was like- So I would say that your job is strategic, Allison's is really operational, and then the teachers and the principals are tactical.
Okay,
Yes.
you had it switched.
Oh, did I have it switched?
Well, you
Sorry.
have
Did I say it
strategic for
backwards? Yes,
board.
so my, sorry.
That is, this thing is why I was being quiet, super quiet the whole time, because I thought this was backwards. And the way I thought it was gonna go was a different way than what you just said now, from what I read, so I was waiting until I got through that.
So that is my bad, because these are Allison's words, so you, is the slide right, or?
The slide's
Yes,
right.
the slide's right.
This
So-
is correct. Yep, the slide's right.
Okay, that, you said something
Tactical
different.
operations.
Okay, that's what I
Yeah,
mean.
and that was just my mistake.
Okay, that's why I was trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
All right.
No, but the way you described it, and again, it's up to you. I mean, this is your process, yours and Allison's to figure out, to work out. So if you have changes to that you want to see, that's something you all can discuss. But that is the way that the process was lined out and described to me as what I was supposed to facilitate.
Do you participate in these board discussions as we kind of look at these things? I mean, at what point do you step back in, or do you step out?
I generally don't participate in the board discussions. The next step would be, I would participate with your administrators and with Allison to help them work through, the board's giving you this direction. So now here are some ways you can suggest how that might be measured and suggest what actual work needs to happen in the building. So I do help with that, but then, I mean, I can always come back, but then generally we give that report to Allison and she's your liaison from this point.
And then as far as the full report, I just want to kind of confirm, I mean, when you talk to people, there's a promise of anonymity on this, I assume.
Correct.
So whatever you can give us in that full report is
People are promised anonymity when they speak. So what you have is, you
redacted.
have categories of teachers said these things, parents said these things, students said these.
That's,
things.
yeah, that's fine, long as we know.
Yes,
the
it's broken
actual
down at a
set.
much more granular level in that full report.
That's all I wanted to confirm. All right.
So usually I have something to say negative, but I'm okay with this process. But the long as that process of what we do as a school board, that's not a closed session, that is like open. And it may not be a discussion with that we take any visitor participation, because this is a conversation between the board, but I think this is a great way to let people hear what we have to say. And then if we make those, determinations, and some people have other things they want to add in, they can write us, they can talk to us. And we may be able to add something in it as we're giving it to Ms. White. But right now, we are their liaison, so I would suggest that people write to us, talk to us about this presentation, what they want to hear about it, because we are now turning into the voice of the people after you've interviewed them. We are the voice of the people, so if they have extra things they want to say, they should email us, preferably email so we can keep it all together, but let us know. And then, because this is the district that we're doing, we're not doing each individual school, we're doing the district.
And not everyone had a voice. So now that the process is out there and people can add their voice to it, certainly that's gonna be a catalyst for that.
If no one has any objection,
Can I ask a question?
please.
So if we go back to the slide that had all the participants and you surveyed different groups,
Yes.
I know with qualitative research, you're looking for saturation of responses rather than numbers, right? Bigger numbers. So two questions. Do you know what percentage or how many you had in each of those constituent groups, and kind of what percentage of that
subgroup they represent? Like how many teachers participated?
I can get that data at a more granular level. I don't have that broken out right now, so I will absolutely get that for you. We were looking at it as a collective group for collective voice, and so generally the research saturation point on that is 30. And so we did get well over 30 for the totality, and the subgroups did not achieve 30 in each individual subgroup, but I will get you those individual numbers. I can provide that for you.
So you have more than 30 across all the groups?
Correct. We had roughly 60 across all the groups.
So some groups are relatively small in their representation.
Correct. I would say support staff tended to be a smaller group in their representation. Each of the board members had an individual meeting. We had each of the principals. Parents, we had a challenge getting parents to participate, but we did have a small group of parents. I would guess 7, but I have to look back.
So that's important
It
because
is.
7 parents out of 500 plus.
Several of the teachers were parents as well, so you had some people that were dual roles, and so they gave their perspective on both, in both categories. But yes, I will get that information for you, so you can see where your underrepresented groups might have been.
And so usually you only expect 30 for the whole.
So research
Sample?
saturation point is 30. For a qualitative study, it's 100 for a quantitative study. And so when you're actually doing interviews, that would be the number that they say, no, you're not doing a dissertation here. You're not going to IRB proposal, but we do try and get well over that minimum. And so getting close to that 60 was, I think, and compared to what we do in other districts, there's a pretty high rate of people who would sit down for an interview.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep, I will get that though for you, and I'll get that to Allison and she can get that back out.
Okay. All right, then, if no one else has any questions and no one else has their hand raised, no one else is doing anything, then I will move on to the next item, which is 3B, staffing update. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate the time and the effort.
Can I share it with you? I'm the worst at this job.
A lot of very interesting.
Sure.
information. And by the way, if board has any questions, can we reach out to you?
You may, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's your computer. So.
We actually had trouble with,
Sorry.
Ben was the one who we discovered we had a terrible trouble with the Google Meets. And so they actually set me up with my own district email address for temporarily because that was the only way we could get people to actually talk to each other. So, yes, you can email me right at your own district.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
I do have a question about process. One of Danielle's questions, she did text me, is are we just going to go directly into talking about the strategic plan, or are we going to send it to a committee to dive in the full report first?
We could do that either way, so as a.
That's
full-
just one of her questions. she
Yeah,
asked.
that could be, either way would work. We could, as a full board, get together, dive into the report. I could get it to you ahead of time, and then we could talk about pillars. Or if you want that report to go through a committee first, and then the full board does pillars, it doesn't, whatever you guys are more comfortable with.
I think
I
that,
think everybody wants to see the full report. So I don't know if
Everyone
we
should
go
see
through a
it, even if
committee.
it's a committee thing or not. I
Right.
don't know which committee we go in.
we
but
make it a committee of the whole.
Then it's no committee of the whole, then it's
Just
gonna
a
be,
work
yeah,
session.
it's either.
Well,
board-
but if we're discussing it, I mean.
Then it's gonna be a full board meeting.
So, however you want to call it, I mean, but the point is we'd be designating it as workshopping, so we could mean it as a committee of the whole.
I'm good with either path that you guys.
Regardless, it's
prefer.
form over substance. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you know, this is cross functional.
Mhm.
And so it really, you know, cuts across, you know, all aspects of your committee. So, you know, there's no one committee that is better off, you know, being part of it, not
I'm just
all curriculum
asking
for
for
the class, so.
that.
Not all policy either.
I was just asking Danielle's question.
I know.
I have enough in our policy committee that we don't need to add any more. Am I right, Ben?
Very right, yes.
So this would be the last committee that I would suggest to go.
All right, so item 3B, staffing update.
So this is a very broad overview, but I wanted to provide just the beginnings of where we are with staffing right now. I'm gonna share my screen so that if anybody should be to be watching. I know, but I gotta share it in the Zoom. Just to make sure that. So this is planning for 22-23. So I was, we've all been doing lots of reading and reading lots of articles and watching lots of things around the impacts of COVID. So I just picked some, just some quotes. This is not information that, this is information we all have. But obviously one of the impacts of COVID is interrupted learning. So there's a critical need to focus on learning recovery. So there was an article on the global education crisis that talked about consolidating curriculum, which is just what we've been talking about ensuring that it's aligned to students' learning levels. So basically differentiation, extending instructional time with high leverage, engaging instructional opportunities. So that impacts our need to have time for remediation, for extension, and again, for more differentiation, and then improving the efficiency of learning. So making sure that we have targeted instruction aligned to what individual students need. So basically all three of these bullet points are simply saying that we need to know where each kid is, what they need, and then plan our instruction appropriately so that every kid is getting what they need. The other huge impact COVID has had on our students is around their social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health. An article from Edutopia, and you can see the quotes up there, but they talked about the chronic stress that changes the chemical and physical structure of the brain, and that can have an impairing cognitive, it can impair cognitive skills like attention, concentration, memory, and creativity, and that it's only worsened existing mental health problems and led to more cases in children and adolescents. We've seen an increase in special education referrals, especially early childhood. Data from 2020 and early evidence from this school year suggests significant setbacks among early learners, obviously from a variety of reasons. Some parents just chose to keep students home during the pandemic for safety. There wasn't as much socialization in places like daycares or early childhood centers. So we've definitely seen in this district an increased number of referrals around speech and language, around OT for our special education for our early childhood students. We did our ESSER survey, and those two pieces again came to the top with our survey with our community staff and parents around social and emotional and mental health supports and addressing learning loss. So keeping that in mind, we met with building principals and we talked about potential staffing needs for the 22-23 school year based on everything that we know about the interrupted learning, widening of learning gaps, trauma, increased need for social, emotional, and the special education. So our staffing priorities became support for students' social, emotional, and mental health, support for intervention in reading and math, support for student behaviors, which is obviously also tied to trauma and mental health, support for special education and evaluations, and support for data use so that teachers can use that data and know exactly where each kid is and plan their instruction appropriately. So some of the early staffing discussions we've had are around the potential of adding a counselor at the middle school. We've talked about having one counselor that could focus on academics and one counselor that could focus on social emotional in order to make sure that we have strong ACP planning, transitioning from 8th grade to high school, and support for teachers around the academic pieces, while still having somebody that can be responsive to the social, emotional, mental health needs of students. We've talked at Parkway, there's a current staff member there who has some training in SEL and intentional play and some other strengths who is not currently being utilized. His position is not specifically for that. So we've talked about transitioning that staff member to focus solely on SEL. We've talked about the addition of a school psychologist because the amount of referrals that we have, that's not going to be a problem that goes away quickly. So we're thinking that's going to be at least a couple of years until students get back into schools and social settings, increasing intervention and coaching at each building, support for the transitions and less structured times at Glen Hills, which is tied right back to that student behavior, and maintaining one full building sub in each school. We had more than that this year, but we can't guarantee that we won't need that moving forward. So that was something that principals were looking to maintain. I'll let Lindsay talk to this last piece about possible budgeting options.
So what we're gonna be looking at is using ESSER funding and utilizing special ed grants. And just also looking at areas of where we're spending, or where areas of maybe we're not doing necessarily as much funding as we have in the past, and just shifting where those funds are being used. And then also just through staff attrition. So staff leaving, coming, changing positions, where are we moving people, and hopefully that will be enough that it's not going to be a drastic increase of staff that we have to have.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Have you guys considered hiring more teachers?
With declining enrollment at this point, we don't see any for additional teaching.
So I think one of the other things also, when we have the meetings with the principals, we also look at the enrollment numbers for each of the grade levels. And so like, what is third grade, what it's gonna look like for third grade? And then looking at, okay, how many teachers to keep class sizes and maintain both sides.
Right.
But
So
how would you, so it said something about coaches and interventionists. How, are you gonna hire someone for that, or is that just an additional role?
no, we currently have coaches and interventionists, and we're just looking at if there's a need to increase that.
So how would you increase, what does that mean?
So
like
hiring
adding-
two more.
Like
or
adding
hiring-
an FTE. in the
Hiring,
area.
hiring more,
Yeah.
so, like, why couldn't you hire another middle school math teacher? or another middle school?
So right now, if you look at our enrollment numbers, there's not a space, like if we were gonna have our class sizes are gonna be 20 to 23.
Yeah.
If we were gonna have a bubble with a huge amount of enrollment, then we would add another teacher, but right now there's just not.
Well, but I mean, we have additional funds, so I don't know, it's just a thought. Because one thing, you know, if you have smaller class sizes, you're gonna have better behavior too.
If we don't have additional funds, so the ESSER funds are not supposed to be used for staffing.
Yeah.
So we have to be creative and use ESSER for other things.
Yeah.
So that we can support staff.
But you're talking about hiring other people, right?
Right, based on the needs that we have right now, especially around social emotional.
You keep, what is that called, the,
ESSER
no, the coaching staff, or coaching,
intervention.
intervention list and coaching. Who are those people actually working with, the interventionalists? Are they working with the actual students, or are they working with the teachers, trying to get them to be better teachers?
Do you want to talk, I mean, it's kind of a dual, but I'll let Jennifer talk to that.
Yeah. So with coaching and interventionists currently right now, at the beginning of the school year, we actually lost an interventionist coach. So we are down one full-time ELA interventionist coach, and we're not able to hire anybody in that position because we did not get any takers in weekend on that. So we've been down one. So there really hasn't been a ton of coaching this year because they have more than full load of students that they're servicing. So they are running the entire day servicing students right now.
So when that happens, why don't you try to hire a new teacher?
It's really difficult to hire additional teachers. And if we hire one teacher, is that teacher going to teach across all the grade levels in elementary? Or is it going to be in one grade level? That would be my question.
Well, yeah, I guess where the highest need would be.
But
and
if
that's
the
what
need
I
is
was gonna
across-
ask.
But if it's across grade levels, I think that's where it gets sticky for us, is that there's needs across grade levels.
Yeah.
So that is where I was gonna ask, and remember, when I asked this, I am not an educator and I don't work in the school system. But if you hire one teacher, say you hired a teacher, and they did do that, that there is teachers that will do special help for first graders or second graders or third graders, and that is their sole job to, make sure that they do some extra work with third graders or bring them together in a collective group.
We're
or-
speaking the same language.
But
Those
I don't
teachers-
understand what you're
So an
not,
interventionist is a teacher who does exactly that. pulls kids from
But-
different grade levels, works on their specific skills, exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, but that is, but I'm trying to understand. But then, if things go back to normal and you hire somebody, they're also going to be coaching. So there is no there won't, if things go the way they are and you hire someone, there won't be a full-time person that will always be dealing with the kids.
No.
They will, I'm talking about if you go to the way you want it to happen and everything is, utopia. There will be 2 people that will be working with staff, teaching them how to teach, I guess, if that's the best way to do it. And then also working with kids. So they're like splitting their time with the 2 people.
And we want to move towards having what you're saying, a dedicated person for coaching, dedicated person for working with.
Well, if
Why-
you get that one,
Well,
I'm
hold on,
sorry, I
I
have one
just
more,
wanna keep
I
on
have one
track
more
here. This is
question
an
in
update.
this. So if we do that one, if you do hire that, can't you do one as a specialist that only teaches the teachers and then keep that one?
Yeah, you can do it either way.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what all right, now I kind of
And it
understand
really-
what
it
you're
really
asking
should
for,
depend
what
on,
you're trying to.
student data and what the needs are.
Okay.
But we can kind of see from the interviews and from teachers and what I'm hearing from staff, and that we do need to do some supports around, we have a lot of new staff, we need to provide professional development, we want to retain the staff we have. So it's important to support, all our new staff members and provide all those instructional supports for them. And a coach is one way to do some of that work with a PD. The other piece to it as well as we are going through an ELA curriculum review, we are going to be making some changes, I'm assuming, and have some additional instructional needs and new implementation supports will be needed. Also for our elementary teachers, we also have a brand new math curriculum. So you're looking at a lot of new things for our teachers and they really need to be supported.
Yeah, I
So
just was
that
trying
would
to
just be-
kind of understand what the difference was and how it all played into what your needs were.
Yeah.
So this is an update for today, and so my question for you is, there's a time frame, and my recollection, of course, hiring can really go through summer, and sometimes, that's when we really.
Ideally not, we'd like to get people earlier in the process.
So this
get
is
better
like really
candidates.
stepping up, like at the right moment to try to like plan it out, so when do you expect to come back to us with a firm recommendation, taking all this into account? I mean, would it be June, would it be May?
I would say April or May. I think as we go.
So we would be acting on it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, because we're gonna be,
And we
giving
give
teachers
folks
contracts too.
Great.
We'd like to give teacher contracts in April and that kind of gives time for things to shake out because like we talked about with the attrition, if there's retirees or anything like that, kind of changes our total FTE and everything. So I would hope by April and.
Because then we
Maybe.
could come up with a solid, we're looking to add, X FTE to our student services team. We're looking to add X FTE to special ed and X amount to teaching. staff.
Great, I appreciate it. Anything else?
My final thought is that if you're gonna hire either a coach or a teacher, I would hire a teacher.
I guess I'm not understanding like how you're delineating the difference because a coach is a teacher, like they're a teacher contract.
Well, they're teachers are not necessarily in the classroom with the kids.
So again, just to stress that we don't have really a firm recommendation, the point here wasn't to tell us what you're doing, but to give us.
Just to give you an idea of what we're seeing and what the needs are, where we're moving.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, then,
I just want to ask one
well,
more
there's a
question.
handout, I mean,
Sorry, to make it as one too.
Oh.
This section is discussion, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to.
yeah, no action.
Are you anticipating any changes in the music program?
I'm not sure if I can answer to that. I probably have to talk with Ms. Young. I don't know if you have any information on that.
I don't. I know they're working on, she's been meeting it with the team, kind of working on some of that scheduling and basing some of that off of the feedback from families and students of what they wanted. Because there was some different options.
Right, so
Additional
because of what you
options.
presented last month, it
Yeah.
seemed like there was gonna be some options, so,
Yeah.
but that wasn't here, so I was just
Yeah.
curious.
And we're gonna be bringing that work back to curriculum in April for more discussion.
Great. Item 3C, COVID update.
Am I still sharing? I just want to make sure the presentation open this.
No.
So right now, we've had 2 cases in the last 2.5 weeks. Really good news. One of the things that we're adjusting is, so the masking at middle school, if there's a positive case, is very difficult because of logistics. I didn't think of this because they don't have one home all day long. So they're moving. So what Nurse Hess has suggested is that for middle school students, she would make calls for close contacts. And then at that point, ask families of close contacts to have their kids masked. And then obviously quarantine is optional for those students, but if they're coming to school, they would have a mask on. Elementary, because they're one cohort all day long, we could still have that homeroom mask. So that was something, we hadn't had any cases. We had our first case this week, and we had to kind of look at that and go, it's not really gonna work to have middle schoolers mask as a homeroom because they don't stay together all day long. So that was an adjustment. We're gonna move back to, well, I guess not move back to because there haven't been cases, but making sure that parents get a communication. So that we're home today to let them know what grade level, so that if they want to mask their child in that grade level, they have the information that there was a case in that grade level. They can send their student a mask if they prefer. Same for staff at the middle school. So I'm making sure that staff know there's a case in 6th grade. So if there's an allied arts teacher or any teacher that has that grade level, if they're more comfortable masking, then they have that information. So I'm going to send out some additional communication to families on Friday, just updating those few tweaks. And that's really the only COVID update. We're going to really keep an eye on data after spring break. The health department doesn't anticipate anything near after Christmas, but they said there could be a bump. So we'll keep track of the data, adjust accordingly. We're still planning for a week after spring break for Parkway kids to go back to the lunchroom, which is something students are very excited about, I'm sure. And then the big one would be then after 2 weeks, just to talk about visitors and parents in the school if our data continues to stay low.
Thank you. Anything? No? Okay, then item 4D or 3D, Nicolay Partner Schools.
So 3 things that we talked about this month that we all agreed to go back and share with our boards. K-12 coaches. So if a teacher is working at Glen Hills, coaching at the high school, we just talked about making sure that there's communication. So if there's state or an event or something where that teacher needs to go with the team, that they just reach out to the principal and say, hey, you know, so-and-so needs to be released for that day, just so that there's that flow of communication. And the AD will notify us if they hire somebody from our district to coach at the high school, because it can impact like games and things where they might have to leave early. So we just talked about increasing that communication. Social media and use of technology. We're looking at partnering opportunities for a speaker that could talk to families, parents, and students about social media and technology use. And so we're going to do some more research around that, because we talked about offering that to parents in all districts as an event. And then almost all districts are still contact tracing. So I guess that's connected to the COVID update, but not as detailed perhaps as before, because we're just doing close contacts. So that was the partner update.
All right then. No questions, then I would move on to item number 5A, 5A and 5B, the consent agenda, approval of financials, approval of minutes.
Second.
All in favor? And well, any discussion first? Seeing none, all in favor on the voice vote, aye.
Aye.
Okay, our last item is item number 6A, visitor participation. Visitors may speak on any non-agenda item at this time. State law and or board policy may limit the board's response. Going once, going twice, and I'm going to close visitor. I'm going to wait actually because
Nobody's on there.
No, nobody's.
okay, then I will close visitor participation and entertain motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. Remember to sign.
You just sign a couple cards. You can just put your name if you want.
No date. Yeah, okay. Get my number, where if we can meet too. Yeah, I can use this number.
You should see my children's boyfriends and girlfriends.
Okay, I thought we- oh,
Yeah, I brought all adults.
That's what I
oh,
But you know,
oh, wait.
Oh, yeah. So you were probably like the
I'm
interrogator.
very-
Oh, yeah.